Once upon a time, in the quiet town of Agura, lived a woman who did something no one else had ever done. Her name was Abini, and she changed her baby's name every single day. On Monday, the baby was Ayami. By Tuesday, she became Hola. On Wednesday, she was more Remy. And by Thursday, Abini was calling her Awa. No one knew why she did what she did, not even her husband, Kola, who thought something was definitely wrong with his wife. The neighbours whispered amongst themselves, wondering if the child was cursed or was stillborn by a lunatic mother. 7 names in 7 days was so ridiculous, it became the talk of the town. As everyone had something to say, Abini must be sick in the head, one of them said, while another believed the child was not hers. How can a woman be so indecisive on the name to give her child? Does she know what this would do to the child when she grows up? They said amongst themselves, shrugging, as Abini walked past them, with her baby strapped to her back. She knew they were talking about her, but Abini did not care. She went about her business, ignoring all their whispers and gossip. Her husband, Kola, could no longer take the embarrassment. You must stop this nonsense. Abini, he snapped. How can our daughter have a different name every day? What do people think? What will she even call herself when she grows? Abini informed him that time would tell. Our daughter will know who she is when the time is right, she replied as she folded her baby's blanket on the bed. Kola was still not convinced by the answer. Stop hiding behind mystery and tell me what is going on, he demanded. But Abini remained silent. Kola was so frustrated and angry, he stormed out of the house. He could not understand why his wife was behaving like a mad woman. As he walked out angrily, his phone rang, and his mother asked why he sounded so angry. Mama, is it not Abini? She has started again, changing the baby's name every single day. Today she called her Desa. Yesterday it was Mori. Who knows what foolishness she will say tomorrow? Mama Kola hissed and began to talk. I warned you. Kola, I told you that girl is not normal. All this quiet behavior and mysterious talk. What kind of mother changes her child's name? Like a rapper. Kola rubbed his forehead in frustration. Mum, I'm tired. People are laughing at me, and it's not even funny. Then do something about it fast, she said. Don't bring shame to me and your father by staying with that witch of a woman. Make sure you leave her now before she does something terrible to you. Kola stood there, deep in thought. That night, Kola packed up his bags and left, leaving Abini alone with their daughter. Abini was heartbroken. She knew this was going to happen, seeing that Kola's mother never liked her from the beginning. She loved Kola so much and believed he would stand beside her, even if the world decided to mock them. But love, she had come to realize, was not always enough. Not when family pressure and shame knocked too loud at the door. Abini looked down at her daughter as tears began to pour from her eyes. She never imagined her daughter would one day grow up without a father. But as fate would have it, she was now alone. She took care of her daughter, ignoring all the terrible things people said and did to them. At a point, no one associated with them, and Abini lived alone with her daughter, who began to grow in the cold and hostile village. A few years later, when her daughter turned 4, Abini tried to enroll her in a nearby school, but the school rejected the application. She has no legal name, the headmistress said sharply, as Abini looked up at her. How can we register a child whose name changes every day? What we write on her file today, Ayami. Tomorrow, Deswa. This is not a joke. Madam, Abini pleaded, tried to explain that her daughter was special, that there was a reason for everything, but no one listened. She was sent away from the school gate, holding her confused daughter, who could not help but ask why they were turned away. Why are they angry? Mama, did I do something wrong? The little girl asked innocently, as Abini forced a smile and said, You didn't do anything wrong, my daughter. They just don't understand. They both walked home. However, the rejection did not stop Abini. She began to teach her daughter at home letters, numbers, stories. Every day was a new lesson, and as the girl grew, so did her strength. She learned quickly and spoke eloquently, far better than most children her age. By the time she was 6, she could read fluently and even began to help her mother with the accounting from their small stall in the market. Still, people whispered and pointed fingers at her in mockery. They called her the name-changing witch, and parents warned their children to stay away from her. Abini could not help but see how hurt her daughter was to see the other children playing together. She watched as her daughter sat by the window alone, watching as the other children laughed and played. So Abini decided to do something about it. She made her daughter the most beautiful doll, crafted from colourful materials. Abini handed the doll to her daughter, who could not hide her excitement. For the first time in years, Abini could see her daughter's face light up at the sight of the doll. She told her daughter to name the doll, and her daughter, without thinking twice, named it Angela, which meant bringer of joy. From that day on, the little girl carried Angela everywhere. She spoke to her, played with her, and taught her all the things her mother had taught her. To anyone watching, it might have seemed odd, another sign that something wasn't right with the name-changing girl. But to Abini's daughter, Angela was a friend when no one else cared to be. As the years went by, Abini's daughter grew into an extremely beautiful young woman. She was now 18 and had no friends except Angela, the doll her mother made for her so many years ago. One day, Abini's daughter went to the stream to fetch water. As she was about to carry the pot of water on her head, she heard a loud scream coming from the forest. She followed the cry and met a pregnant woman who seemed to be in labor. She had just been bitten by a venomous snake, and the poison was spreading fast. Abini's daughter quickly found a cloth and tied it around the woman's leg to stop the poison from spreading. Before she knew what was happening, the woman pushed out a baby in front of her eyes. She sat there confused as the woman let out her last breath. Abini's daughter held the newborn baby in her hands, wondering what she was going to do. She looked around and found the strange woman's bag lying next to her lifeless body. She took it home and met her mother, who asked where the baby had come from. Abini stood there and listened as her daughter explained everything that happened, how she had followed the scream, helped the woman in labor, and watched her die right there in the forest. She didn't say anything. Mama! She didn't tell me her name. She just left her baby behind, and I didn't know what to do. Abini took the baby from her daughter's arms, her experienced arms cradling the newborn with tenderness. She looked down at the infant's face, her eyes softening with a mix of sorrow and awe. Then she turned to her daughter and said, "We must find the child's family. The baby deserves to grow up knowing where she comes from." Her daughter nodded and handed over the bag the woman had left behind. Abini opened it carefully, hoping for a clue. At the bottom of the worn-out bag, beneath a crumpled scarf and an old wrapper, she found a photograph. It was a picture of a man they had never seen before. Abini wondered how they could find him. She searched the bag thoroughly, but found nothing that could help. No name, no address, nothing. Abini had no idea how she would find him. She knew the villagers would be of no help, seeing how they avoided them like a plague. So Abini decided to keep the baby in their home until they found the man whose face was in the picture. Days turned into weeks, but still, there was no sign of the man in the photograph. Abini often stared at the picture, hoping that something, anything, would stir her memory or lead her to someone who knew him. But Agura was a town where people minded their own business, and Abini's family had long been treated as outcasts. No one dared to speak to them, let alone help them. So, Abini and her daughter continued to care for the child. One day, Abini decided it was time the baby got a name. She told her daughter to pick a name for the baby. Without wasting any time, her daughter picked the name Arya. From the moment she said the name Arya, Abini's daughter felt a wave of happiness she could not explain. It was as though the baby whispered the name in her ears. The connection she felt with the baby in that moment was so deep and powerful. Her mother, Abini, also noticed the connection. She could see the joy in her daughter's eyes, a stillness that hadn't been there before. Abini was so grateful for the baby. At last, her daughter could have a friend who, although small, would not judge her or mock her the way the villagers had done all her life. For the first time in years, their house felt full. It was no longer just the two of them. It was now a home filled with soft baby cries, innocent giggles, and a kind of peace that made Abini silently thank the heavens. The neighbors wondered where the baby had come from. "I told you she's a witch," one of them said, revealing she overheard some chants in Abini's house the night before. "We can't live next to a witch. It's either she leaves with her witch daughter, or we drive her out ourselves." That was how the whispers became a meeting, and the meeting soon became a mob. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside Abini's compound, their faces filled with suspicion, fear, and anger. Some carried sticks, while others held Bibles and bottles of anointing oil. They banged on her door repeatedly as Abini walked out of the house slowly, with her daughter by her side. She was holding baby Arya in her hands. The villagers all opened their mouths in shock to see a baby in her arms. She looked the crowd in the eye, and for the first time in years, she did not flinch. "What have I done?" Abini asked, her voice calm but firm. "Which one of you came to me with kindness? Which one offered me friendship? When my husband left, you laughed. When I taught my child alone, you mocked. And now, because I took in a child from the bushes, I am a witch." Someone in the crowd replied, asking where the baby had come from and where her mother was. Abini explained how her daughter came across the baby, but the villagers found it hard to believe. They requested to see where the baby's mother had died, and Abini, alongside her daughter, took them to the forest where she was last seen. When they arrived at the scene, the strange woman's body was gone. All that remained were scattered leaves and a torn headscarf stained with dried blood. "Lies," one of the villagers shouted. "She buried the woman herself after using her for rituals." "I told you," another yelled angrily, pointing an accusing finger at Abini. This is why she changed her daughter's name every day to practice her witchcraft. The angry mob chased them out of the village as Abini ran off with her daughter and the newborn baby. They ran until their legs could carry them no more. Night fell over the dusty road as Abini, breathless and trembling, clutched Arya tightly to her chest, while her daughter clung to her side, barefoot and weeping. They had no food, no belongings, and nowhere to go. In desperation, Abini remembered one place, her husband's mother's house, tucked in the neighbouring village of Aketu. She hadn't set foot there since her wedding, but with nowhere else to run, she decided to go. Maybe, she whispered to her daughter, maybe she'll have mercy. They arrived in the dead of night, tired, hungry, and covered in dust. Abini knocked gently on the rusted gate, her voice weak as she called out, "Mama Kola, please." A light flickered inside. Moments later, Kola's mother opened the door and caught sight of them. "You witch," she said, her eyes fixed on Abini. "What are you doing in my home?" "Mama, please," Abini begged. "They chased us. They said I killed someone. I have nowhere else to go." Mama Kola's eyes fell on the baby, her face turning to disgust. "What bastard child is that? Another one you've bewitched. You bring this child and your mad daughter here to pollute my home." Abini's daughter gasped, holding tighter to her mother. "Mama, please," Abini said again, her knees buckling as she fell to the ground. "Just one night, I beg you, Mama." But the old woman spat on the floor beside her. "If you don't leave now, I'll call the town boys and tell them the same thing those villagers said, that you're a witch who steals children. In fact, I should have stopped Kola from marrying you. But no, he said you were quiet and respectful. Now see the disgrace you've brought to us." Abini stood slowly, her face pale as her hands began to shake. "Don't ever come near my house again," Mama Kola warned, pointing toward the road. "You and that daughter of yours whose name changes like a chameleon, you can all die for all I care." She banged the door in their faces, leaving them alone in the dark. Abini stood frozen for a moment as the sound of the slammed door echoed in her ears. Her daughter held her wrapper, shivering as the night wind blew gently. Baby Arya whimpered faintly in her arms, too young to understand the world that had already turned its back on her. Abini looked up at the sky, the stars watching silently as tears filled her eyes. But still, she refused to let them fall. Not again. She had cried enough tears to fill the village river. Now all she had was survival. "Keep walking," she said to her daughter, who asked where they were going. "I don't know yet, my daughter, but wherever it is, I know it will surely be better than here." And so they began to walk under the cover of night. They walked for hours and came across an empty hut by the side of the forest. Abini decided to lay low in the hut. She could see how exhausted her daughter was, and the baby had already fallen asleep in her arms. Inside the hut, there was nothing but dry leaves, broken wooden planks, and dust. But to Abini, it felt like a palace because, for the first time in days, they were finally safe. She laid Arya down and watched her daughter coil up beside the baby, wrapping her arms protectively around her. Abini leaned against the wall, whispering a soft prayer, her eyes finally closing as her body gave in to exhaustion. They slept for hours, and when morning came, Abini realized her daughter was nowhere to be found. "Adutu," she called out desperately, then paused, realizing she hadn't given her daughter a name for that day. Adutu was the name she bore the previous day, and Abini knew better than to call her that. She stepped out of the hut and looked around, but her daughter was nowhere to be found. Filled with panic, Abini began to walk around the village, searching for her daughter. Baby Arya was strapped to her back as she walked down the roads of the village, asking everyone she came across if they had seen her daughter. But no one knew who she was talking about. All they asked was her daughter's name, and Abini had no answer to the question, for her daughter was nameless. Abini walked aimlessly as tears began to pour from her eyes. This was the first time she had not named her daughter, and Abini could not bear the thought of anything bad happening to her. She decided to return to the hut, hoping her daughter would have returned. When she arrived, she met an old woman sitting outside the hut. Abini apologized to the old woman for sleeping in her hut. "I didn't know someone lived here. We found it empty and decided to spend the night," she said. The old woman asked why she looked so sad. Abini explained everything, how they were accused of being witches and sent away from their village, and how her daughter was now missing. Abini pleaded with the old woman to allow her to stay in the hut until her daughter returned. "My daughter knows nowhere in the village. Please let me stay here till she returns," she pleaded. The old woman agreed. "You can stay for as long as you want," she said to Abini, who could not hide her gratitude. Baby Arya, however, began to cry at the top of her lungs. Abini put her down from her back, wondering what she would give her to eat. The old woman pointed at a pot in the distance. "There's some milk in the pot. Why don't you heat it up and give it to the baby to drink?" she said. Abini thanked her immensely and rushed off to heat the milk. Baby Arya wailed uncontrollably as she lay on the mat, her tiny fists clenched, her face soaked in tears. The old woman hummed a lullaby, her voice low and sweet, hoping to soothe the child, but Arya cried even louder, her body twisting with distress. As Abini watched with growing concern, she had never seen Arya cry like that before, not even once, and it made her believe something was wrong. Just as she was about to lift Arya from the mat, Abini felt a sharp pain shoot through her spine. Her vision blurred, and her knees buckled beneath her. She crashed to the ground beside Arya, who was still crying uncontrollably. She tried to speak, but her tongue felt heavy. Everything around her began to spin. Her eyes met those of the old woman, and for a brief moment, Abini saw something that chilled her soul. The old woman smiled a slow, wicked smile before she began to speak. "You shouldn't have come here, Abini," she said, her voice no longer soft but deep and laced with venom. "You brought her to me, the one I've searched for all these months." Abini's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She watched helplessly as the old woman walked to where the baby lay and, with a wicked smile, lifted her from the mat. "So this is the child," she whispered darkly. "The cursed princess they thought I wouldn't find." Years ago, this old woman had killed the reigning king and seized control of the royal palace. She planned to place her son on the throne, but when she discovered the king's wife was pregnant, she panicked. The child was the true heir, so she hunted the queen down, but the queen had disappeared, hidden by prayers. All efforts to find the queen proved futile, as the old woman's evil power was no match for the queen's protection. However, when the queen died in the forest, the old woman could, for the first time, see the baby through her dark mirror. There was a problem, though she could not trace the child directly, because another girl had taken her, and that girl had no fixed name. Thousands of names confused the spirits, and the path was never clear, so the evil woman followed their trail, one day at a time, but Abini and her daughter were always ahead of her, no matter what she did. Now the baby was in her hands, and Abini was under the spell of the evil woman, who paralyzed her entire body with her dark power. Abini remembered the dream she had when she was pregnant with her daughter. She saw herself holding a young woman in her arms and crying. In the dream, Abini knew the grown woman was her daughter, even though she was still pregnant at the time. The girl was dead in her arms, and a strange woman appeared, warning her not to name her child. She told Abini to give her daughter a name a day, until the one who has been named is set free. The woman warned that if she failed to do so, her daughter would die a miserable death, as she had seen in the dream. Abini woke up from that dream terrified. She decided to do as the woman instructed, and gave her daughter a new name every day. At the time, Abini did not understand her dream, but now, as she lay there, she began to understand what was happening. For the first time since her daughter was born, she had failed to give her a name, leaving room for the evil woman to find them. Abini lay helpless, her heart racing. She tried to pray, but her tongue still felt like stone. She watched the woman place Arya on the table and hold up a dagger, her eyes filled with evil, as she raised the dagger above her head and began to speak. "This child will never see her throne. She will die before her name can be known." The door of the hut burst open. It was Abini's daughter, panting, barefoot, and fierce-eyed. Behind her stood a tall man with the same face as the one in the photograph from the dead woman's bag. He was the queen's only brother, whom everyone thought was dead. The evil woman's son had sent men to attack him in the forest years ago. They beat him to a stupor and buried him in a shallow grave. What they did not know was that someone saw what they did and rushed to save him. For all these years, he disguised himself and lived in plain sight. After the king died mysteriously, he heard that his sister, the queen, had run away. He began to search everywhere for her and found her dead body in the forest, hours after she had passed. He noticed she had given birth but had no idea where the baby could be. He settled in the village where his sister was found dead, roaming silently, searching for the baby. When he heard the story of the girl whose mother changed her name daily and that the woman now had a strange baby in her home, he watched from a distance as the people accused Abini of being a witch. Abini revealed that her daughter had helped a pregnant woman who died in the forest. It was then he confirmed the child was his niece. He secretly followed them out of their village, moving from village to village, looking for a place to settle. He kept his distance, watching as they wandered the streets that night, and arrived at the strange hut by the side of the forest. That night, Abini's daughter woke up to relieve herself in the bush, and saw him standing outside the hut. He convinced her to follow him if she wanted to know the truth. Recognizing his face from the photograph, Abini's daughter followed him, and he told her all that happened to his family and the truth about the baby, who turned out to be the princess. The old woman screamed in anger when she saw him standing there. "You again," she barked. "Why don't you stay buried?" "Because truth doesn't lie," the man replied, stepping forward. "And neither will my niece." Before the old woman could utter another word, The queen's brother grabbed her hand from behind and plunged the knife into her own abdomen. The old woman fell to the floor, clutching her stomach as she fought for her life. As the evil woman took her final breath, the hut fell into a strange silence. Baby Arya stopped crying instantly. Abini sat up and rushed to hug her daughter. "I'm happy you are okay," she said to her daughter, whom she finally gave a name for the last time. Abini looked deep into her daughter's eyes, her voice trembling with emotion, and whispered, "You are no longer nameless, my child. Your name is Lua." The name rolled off her lips like a gentle breeze. It meant hope of God and carried the weight of every tear, every insult, every sacrifice they had endured. Her daughter's eyes filled with tears as she told her mother how much she loved the name. The queen's brother stepped forward, holding baby Arya gently in his arms. "We must go, for the kingdom awaits its true heir." Lua smiled at her mother as they followed the queen's brother, Dorton, back to the palace. Immediately they arrived. The people opened their eyes in shock to see Dorton. He stood in their midst and announced that the lost princess had been found. The crowd broke out in jubilation. The evil woman's son, who was scheming to take over the throne, heard that the princess had been found and that his mother was dead. He tried to escape, but the people surrounded him and locked him up in the palace prison. Abini and her daughter were welcomed like queens. Dorton stood before the royal court and declared, "This woman, Abini, and her daughter have preserved the crown that evil tried so hard to destroy. They have suffered for protecting a truth they never even knew. From this day forward, they shall rule beside me on behalf of Princess Arya until the day she comes of age to take her rightful place." The whole palace erupted in jubilation as the people bowed before them in reverence. Back in Agura, the news spread like wildfire, and the people who once called Abini mad and possessed gathered in shame. Even Mama Kola and her son Kola could not believe what they were hearing. They began to regret how badly they treated Abini, seeing how life had rewarded her for her diligence. As for little Arya, she thrived under their care, playful, intelligent, and strong-willed as they prepared her for the day she would sit on the throne, the day a once-lost princess would rise to become the greatest queen the kingdom had ever seen. The lesson to be learned from this story is that sometimes what the world mocks today is what destiny honors tomorrow. People may misunderstand your silence, your choices, or your struggle, but as long as your heart is pure and your intentions are guided by love, truth will always find its voice in the end. Abini was ridiculed, abandoned, and called mad, yet her patience, sacrifice, and faith protected not only her daughter but a kingdom. This tale teaches us never to judge what we do not understand, and to remember that every name, every pain, and every step in our journey may be leading us to something far greater than we can imagine.